Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished moderator, Helena Evich, Senior Food and Agriculture Policy Reporter at Politico, and our conversation chair, the Honorable Congressman Dwight Evans, representing the state of Pennsylvania to the U.S. House of Representatives for the session Food Policy and Our Future.
Do I need to turn it on? All right, good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. My name's Helena Bottemiller Evich. I'm the Senior Food and Agriculture Reporter at Politico, and I'm delighted to be here with Congressman Evans today to help lead this wonderful group. We were just discussing, it's probably the largest panel that the two of us have been a part of, so we're looking forward to that. It is my job today to really just keep us on track and on time so that we can cover all three topics that we've set out to discuss today. So I will just be keeping us on track and trying to moderate the conversation. Your microphone, I believe you need to turn it on if you want to speak and then turn it off when you're done speaking. That's the simplest instructions I'm going to give. All right. So go ahead, Congressman.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'd too like to say good morning. My name is Dwight Evans. I'm from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I represent what you call the 2nd Congressional District. It's a combination of Philadelphia and the western suburbs. And I think, Helena, as I said to earlier, they asked me, because I'm low man on the totem pole, to come here to do this. But no, it really is my pleasure to be here because this is a topic that I've spent an awful lot of time talking about. And one of the reasons I've talked a lot about it, because I've said that food policy is foreign policy. Food policy is foreign policy. I'm on the Agriculture Committee, and right now we're reviewing the discussion around the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is reauthorized every 5 years, started in 1933 with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Farm Bill has implications of $500 billion. And obviously that food policy just does not affect domestic foreign policy, it affects international foreign policy. And it's very clear to me in the short period of time that I've been in Washington, D.C., that food policy is an issue that transcends boundaries, transcends parties. And it really, to me, is not focused on parties. So although I've been in Washington only for 9 months, I was in the state legislature in Pennsylvania for 36 years. I was in state legislature. And I was the chairman of the House Appropriation Committee, the very same position that Ben Franklin held when it was called the Ways and Means Committee. Ben Franklin held that particular position. So if you don't know much about Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is a rural state. People talk about Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, but basically it's a rural state. It's an agriculture state. And agriculture policy has a great deal to do with driving the engine of Pennsylvania. So I've spent a lot of time, for example, one of the areas I spent is try to address food deserts. And that has been an issue that was affecting Pennsylvania like it affects throughout the nation and the world. I came up with an idea of a partnership where we formed about putting supermarkets in areas that had not been served. And I put this partnership together in Pennsylvania. The Obama administration adopted it. It was put into the Farm Bill when President Obama was president. And a part of the Let's Move initiative that the First Lady was promoting, we also did that. So we went from supermarkets to farmers markets to all kinds of aspects of food. So now that I'm in Washington, basically I've tried to take that same skill set of what I learned in Pennsylvania and take it to the national level. But I say this in closing, Helena. When I first got on the committee, somebody said, how many farms do you have in your district? I said, that is the wrong question. The question is, how many consumers do I have in my district? Because there's a direct connection between consumers and farmers and growers. And I think a lot of times people tend not to understand the importance of consumers connected to farmers and growing. And it's extremely important towards the future and where we need to go.
Thank you so much. So we have a slightly shorter than expected time frame, so I'm going to kick us off right from the beginning. Our first scenario that we're going to discuss this morning is changes to Title III, which covers trade and foreign aid. the scenario which you all have. I'm just going to briefly cover it. The United States has led global funding support for international food assistance for the past half century, but proposed cuts to foreign aid indicate changes in this trend. And it's not just the market access program that's been targeted, but also Food for Peace and other foreign aid programs that have been sort of discussed as potentially on the chopping block. The private sector relies upon these programs to tap into new consumer pools and engage smallholder farmers as a mechanism from which to create shared value and build an inclusive agricultural supply. How will expected cuts to foreign food aid programs hurt the formation of these supply chains, and how can public-private partnerships overcome these challenges? I think it's probably no secret that the discussion in Washington right now doesn't even matter what program it is usually along the lines of how can we cut back or how can we do more with less. So I think this is a pertinent sort of question to raise to the group. I don't know if there's anyone who feels particularly well suited to kick us off here. Anyone deal directly with international aid? Maybe I know we have Cargill in the audience. Does anyone want to kick it off? Or I'll call. Yes,
Hi.
great, wonderful.
Good morning, Elizabeth Fay with Cargill. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the Congressman for your remarks. We couldn't agree more that there is a direct linkage between consumers and farmers. 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States. Agricultural exports from the United States play a critical role in feeding the world. And so when we are looking, and I think as you've rightly pointed out, there are some significant challenges coming up with the Farm Bill. Majority of the programs have their baseline only until 2018, and so that will put real fiscal challenges and constraints on how we fund these programs. And so innovative linkages, looking at value chain collaborations, the win-win. Cargill is working with farmers around the world where you can link some of this international assistance, which is not only critical to make countries food secure on their own, but also promote stability and peace and also economic opportunity for other farmers in the United States and manufacturing. I'll take an example of cocoa. That's a crop that's grown in West Africa. It must be grown around the equator, but supporting with international aid and development of those markets means that cocoa is exported to the United States, processed in Pennsylvania into cocoa powder and chocolate that is providing manufacturing jobs, and that chocolate then is going into other food and beverage applications around the United States. So it's a multiplier effect. So ideally you have a steward with the federal government providing that incentive, but also looking at a value chain approach where you can support that market demand and pull will be an amplifier for a situation where we are facing reduced resources.
Mm-hmm. Is it, just to follow up on that, is it your sense that Congress sort of gets that connection between, market access, foreign aid, and sort of the mutual benefits? I mean, because the administration sort of proposed these cuts, and then Congress was like, actually, we're not gonna, go as severely. Do you find that connection is well understood on the Hill?
I think that when stakeholders, whether it's the agricultural community or business, go and share that perspective, they certainly do. Any Congress, Parliament, their constituency is going to always be top of mind. So it's normal to think about it through your frame of reference of how does this impact my district or my state. So it may not be the first layer, but once you've had that conversation, whether it's actually supporting market access or an international aid, many of these companies like Cargill and others that are working in overseas markets, having that calling card of international aid, whether it's a program on the ground with a USAID or a USAID partner, or it's actually those USDA Foreign Agricultural Service workers there, that's a powerful calling card for U.S. business in some markets where it's a very challenging government or governance situation.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to weigh in? Yep, go ahead. Gustavo Setrini. I can actually read that, but I can't read
great.
underneath that.
I'll introduce myself.
New York University. Yes, I can.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Gustavo Setrini. I'm a professor of food studies at NYU, and I've done a lot of research on value chain formation and local development in Latin America. And I guess it's just really important, and right off the bat, to point out that the effects of U.S. foreign assistance, and particularly food aid, have been very contradictory in the developing world, in places like Latin America, South Asia, and Africa. Where on the one hand, there are a lot of hungry people, and so food can feed hungry mouths. It hasn't, decades of this kind of policy hasn't led to any kind of sustainable solution, and part of the reason is because it creates dependence on that aid. It distorts local markets. It distorts and limits the kinds of institutional developments that lead to sort of small farmer integration at the local and national level, and sort of integration into global markets under better conditions. And on the other hand, a lot of the sort of private value chain initiatives, like in the cocoa industry, have deep colonial roots. And so the structures that integrate those farmers into markets are also quite often deeply exploitative at various levels. And similarly, I think, the current political scenario in Washington is not particularly, or doesn't make me particularly optimistic that we're going to get the kinds of reforms that would move those policies in the right direction. It doesn't seem that there's a lot of political support for, sort of austerity and cutting these programs is obviously not the right answer. But I guess from my point of view, the fact that this is a disruptive moment, that we're seeing, attacks or threats to these kinds of programs is an opportunity to change the dialogue and to insert other concerns and other perspectives that are hopefully going to be informed not simply by U.S. interests or the interests of private companies that are based in the U.S., but by groups that are actually in the global South.
Yeah, you bring up a complicating factor, I think, I don't know if you hear about this on Capitol Hill, but part of the support historically for a lot of these foreign aid programs has been, also U.S. farmers, because they are able to sell products into these programs. I don't know if anyone has a thought to kind of follow up on that point. Yep.
So this is probably not directly in response to that point. So I'm Elise Golan. I'm at the Department of Agriculture in the Office of the Chief Economist. I'm the Director for Sustainable Development. And as you know, the Farm Bill is really something that belongs to Congress. And at USDA, we're mostly observers. We supply, to the best of our ability, research, policy analysis, data to help inform the Farm Bill policy discussions. But as I hear you speak, and as I've heard the representatives speak, it brings to mind just a general observation about the Farm Bill and about the general policy discussion. The Farm Bill is very flawed in one fundamental way that I want to talk about, and that is it kind of silos our thinking about policy and about farm policy and what it means. And as you pointed out, farm policy is more than just farm policy, it's peace policy, it's development policy, it's so many other things. And as we dig through the titles, something that happens, and it's a bad thing that happens to us, is we tend to silo our thinking about nutrition into the nutrition title, about trade in the trade title, about conservation in the conservation title, about horticulture in the horticulture title. And we forget that all of these things affect each other, and that we will be evaluated on our success about how all those things fit together. And not only that, but then how that fits together with a general policy environment, what's happening at EPA, FDA, at State Department, many other places. So I think it is important to provide that context and think about the Farm Bill, not just by title, but by the whole thing, and then in a bigger context.
Does anyone want to follow up? Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to follow on that because I think it's really important. My name is Dwight Bush, and until recently I was the American ambassador to Morocco. And one of the cornerstones of our relationship with the Moroccans were our development programs, whether it was the Millennium Challenge Compact or parts of USAID or the help and support that we got from USDA. It was critical. And it was critical because of what we were doing. In Millennium Challenge, we had a compact. It was about $700 million, of which $400 million was dedicated to helping to develop small SMEs, farmers, to help to build fisheries, to help to build fruit farms, et cetera. It directly affected 35,000 people who were trained. The leverage on it was about 2 million people. And as a consequence of it, for the first time in Morocco, you have this development of SMEs in rural communities. And from a geopolitical perspective, it's really important because these are people who need jobs. And with the absence of jobs, they start to be affected by other forces. They listen to things on the internet, and they are sometimes co-opted by forces that have negative geopolitical implications for us. With the USDA, they helped us to develop more trade with Morocco. So we had a problem with aphids on clementines a couple of years ago, and USDA spent over sent a group of technicians who helped to address the issue, which allowed more Moroccans to sell clementines to the United States and take advantage of our free trade agreement. The third part of it is our technical support and the things that we do and programs like the Millennium Compact is that they help to build sustainable skills in country that are really more important to the countries than the dollar amounts that we attach to them. So I appreciate the Congressman's comment about food policy being foreign policy because it is indeed true. And in many developing countries, it is a positive identification with the United States. You help to educate our people, you help to give us jobs that are sustainable, and you helped us to build some stabilities in the way we approach topics and ideas that last far beyond the dollars you give us.
Yeah.
I want to piggyback just a little bit.
Talk whenever you want.
I've only been there for 9 months, and I do not disagree with just to express that we have a way of thinking in silos. And I say we because I'm not one of those people who, like, on the outside, I'm on the inside, so I do. But I think this kind of discussion is the first one about moving a larger discussion. Now, this is the first time that I will have experienced dealing with the Farm Bill. But I share with you, as I have traveled around, I've constantly raised the consciousness about a larger discussion. So I don't disagree that we could either be stuck with the past or look towards the future. And I know some people may think that it's not possible to make change in Congress, and I understand that too. However, this is what I consider like open enrollment. It's open, for those of you connected in the health areas, it's open enrollment time, meaning between here and reauthorization, between here and next year, there's the opportunity for this discussion to take place. That's in a sense why I'm here. I'm here as a person who haven't been around there 20, 30 years. I come there with the idea because one thing I want to connect, in the district I'm in, the poverty number is 28.1%. There's 196,000 people in poverty in the 2nd Congressional District. So I understand the poverty numbers, I understand the food insecurity, I understand strategies that we need to do, and I understand that, yes, there's government's role, but there's also private sector. There's a private ship, as they say, building partnerships for social impact. So I recognize that there's a lot of work we have to do, and the point of it is we got the opportunity, and that's how I view it.
Hi. I want to follow up on the Congressman's comments and on the Ambassador's comments with a testimonial. I'm from El Salvador.
Yourself. Carlos Calleja from Grupo Calleja.
From El Salvador, yes.
Which is a retailer, right?
Supermarket company.
Yes.
We have 100 supermarkets, and I've been dedicated to the private sector, but now I'm launching a new career. I'm actually aspiring to be the president of our country in the next couple of years for an election in February of 2019.
Wow.
Large part because of the experience I've had
news
with
right
small
now?
farmers. No, that's already out there.
Okay.
But I wanted to go to the foreign policy issue mentioned by the Congressman and seconded by the Ambassador. We also participated in the Millennium Challenge. And we created an incredible supply chain. We have close to 100 supermarkets in El Salvador. And it was really frustrating for us because 95% of the produce that we sold in our supermarkets we had to import. We imported from Guatemala, from Mexico, from other countries. We had a land reform in our country decades back, and the reality of that was that we have many, many small farmers, but many, many small farmers living in poverty. The products that they grow don't allow them to really move ahead in life, or educate their children, get their children out of the dire straits that they're in. So what we did was we created a direct supply chain between a market, a supermarket, and small producers. We had incredible allies. After the Millennium Challenge, we started working with the Clinton Foundation through their Clinton Justra arm, which is an arm focused on enterprise. And we were able to build something monumental. We had the visit of President Clinton and Carlos Slim last year to celebrate the results. And I really believe in this model. And I'm glad that you were talking about it and you're dealing with it directly now in your position of leadership. Because if you can build these supply chains and you can go direct and you can offer a market and you can bring in training, you can bring in technology, you can bring in financing, you can really get these people off the ground. I don't believe in, at least for countries like El Salvador, substituting small farmers with a big agro industry that just comes on top of it and wipes out the small farmers. There's a lot of small farmers who want to continue to be small farmers. They love the land. That's the only opportunity they have. The problem is that the revenues that they create for their families are slim to none. But if you can educate these people, if you can diversify the crops that they're growing on their small pieces of land, if you can connect them to a supply chain, if you can take out, and this is a fundamental element, the blood-sucking intermediary and bring in a healthy intermediary, which helps coordinate, administrate, and allows the farmers to do what they need to do, which is farm, in an educated fashion, you can really change the landscape of development. We've seen it in El Salvador in small size up to now because it was just a private relationship. It was a private-public relationship with our company. But it's something that I'm taking to our government plan because I really believe for small developing countries that are strongly agro, we can bring change, we can bring development to thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people worldwide, if we build what I call encadenamientos productivos, these supply chains which allow us to go directly to those farmers. So I'm a big fan of it, and I'm happy to be here and to share this story, and I congratulate you guys for your vision.
So let's build off of that example, because I think that sort of touches on several things that have been said here about just development and using agriculture as a way to build sustainable supply chains. Are there policies that you see could support that? I mean, what are the policies, I guess, that you would need to support more of that in other countries and other places? Like, what are the things? Are there barriers that need to be torn down? Is it just a matter of people doing the work?
In terms of foreign policy from the United States?
Just in general, like even domestically, how, what are the types of things a country should do in a farm bill or in their own agricultural policy that would support that?
I think we have to bet on the small farmers. I think we have to make a bet on small farmers and try to bring local farming back into the limelight. I say in Spanish, hay que poner el agro de moda, which means we have to make it fashionable. Because a lot of kids don't want to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. The sons of farmers don't want to do this, and they look for opportunities elsewhere. In El Salvador's case, it's unfortunate because you're coming from a poor family, you don't want to bet on agriculture, so what do? You migrate to urban areas. And what do you find there? Delinquency. Or you look for a dream in another country, which is the United States, and you risk your life to come here. And you take risks, and then it complicates the situation in terms of what's going on with migration in the United States. Mm-hmm. So I would say at a local level, it's valid that we should bet on small farmers. And I think in terms of foreign policy, especially for countries like El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, which are countries whose interests are aligned with the United States in terms of migration, in terms of violence and security, we should bet on that sector. Because if we can create opportunities for these kids, for these youths, working the land, we'll be able to mitigate a lot of the risks that we have right now in migration. So my invitation would be in that direction.
Fascinating, thanks. Anyone want to follow up on that point? Oh, Sam Garwin from
Fleischers.
Thank you.
My name is Sam Garwin. I'm the CEO of Fleischers. We are a meat company here based in New York City, and we specialize in pasture-raised animals, raised outdoors without antibiotics and hormones and humanely handled. I just wanted to build on what Carlos said and just say that, in the United States, we have not bet on our small farmers either. And most of the policies that exist in the Farm Bill are designed for very large companies growing monocultures. And they do not support diversified farms. They do not support small farms. And what we face, it's hard enough for one of our farmers to get his products from upstate New York to New York City. So the idea that that same farmer is going to provide his products to China is kind of crazy, or any other country. In terms of how we can support them better, the distribution and logistics, I think, are the weak point now. At least in the United States, we've seen a resurgence of people interested in artisanal products. And we say it's now sexy to be a butcher, which is fortunate for us. It's becoming a little bit more sexy to be a farmer, but what will never be sexy is or has not become sexy yet, I won't say never, is the distribution and logistics. And there's a huge gap right now for, working in a slaughterhouse, for trucking, for all of these things, which are the threads that connect, that make it a supply network rather than just a completely vertically integrated company that owns everything from the farm to the consumer. And I don't think that those completely vertically integrated systems are sustainable. And I think the government can do a lot to improve the chances of a true, vibrant, resilient network of people who specialize in their particular fields.
Do you want to follow up on it? So we have Beth Sauerhaft.
Beth Sauerhaft.
Yeah.
I wonder if one of the answers to the challenge of, how do we get kids to go into agriculture and what's good policy and how to help the smallholder. One is technology seems to be sexy. And so I think as younger people are looking at farming, do they see it as sexy or as less sexy because they're not seeing the recent growth and investment in ag tech? The venture dollars going into ag has been growing significantly over the last few years. And I think that the more that younger people are seen as using technology, whether it's in distribution, whether it's on the farm, whichever part of the supply chain, I think that policy that will support the development and implementation of technology in agricultural supply chains is positive. And also policies that make it easier for young people to go into farming who perhaps don't have the money to buy land. And I know, again, one sees a lot of investment where, or investment arrangements where, there's, I guess these funds are sort of helping new farmers who can't afford the money for land. They're helping them get into farming, I think with the goal of ultimately owning their own land. So I think policies that will stimulate more of that to happen are beneficial as well.
Yep. John Fisk
Hi,
from
John Fisk with Winrock International. It's eerie, the solutions here that are emerging internationally around development and creating the benefits that we've heard Gustavo talk about that are needed, and the domestic solutions that we're finding, right? The resurgence in the fastest growing market in the U.S. is really around local and regional food systems that create that transparency, right? And it's the transparency that's really important, because then we know we're getting the benefits, that we're actually linking development goals with trade policy, right, which is our goal. And those seem to be the goal domestically as well as internationally. There's a suite of policy programs at USDA, whether they be grant programs, loan programs, cost share programs that exist now that are at stake in the next Farm Bill. These need to be renewed, and they need to have additional funding to them. There's some innovative new ideas that I think expand those. Things like a food safety cost share program, right? With new development of FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, we have renewed pressure on growers of all sizes and facilities of all sizes in that local and regional supply chain to meet these new demands that are now regulatory that in many ways used to be voluntary, right? And so we're gonna continue this vertical integration and consolidation if we don't invest in our small and regional farmers that meet these local and regional supply chains. So a cost share program, right, which is policy, which is investing in businesses, seems to make good sense. Similarly, we need investment in infrastructure that was mentioned earlier. things like food hubs, things like distribution systems. Technology certainly reduces the costs around these kind of relationships that allow small farms to access large markets. Think of farmer co-ops across the globe. There's a very big parallel there between those. Similarly, it's not all about investment, in our opinion. It's also about coordination. It's about soft infrastructure. Individuals that can bridge between small growers, larger markets, and regulation, and link those people together. Farmers can't afford to spend their time all the marketing, and buyers can't afford their time trying to understand small growers. We need individuals in the middle, what we're calling value chain coordinators. We're piloting a program with USDA called Food Link. The past administration invested in this program. We'd like to see it established in the next Farm Bill.
Yeah, it's interesting to draw the parallels between development policy and rebuilding infrastructure in the U.S. I think that's really interesting. Does anyone want to follow up on that? Yep. Justin Kamine?
Yeah, Justin Kamine from KDC Ag. So our family's actually been developing and owning and operating large-scale infrastructure across the U.S. And now we're deploying a technology that's fully commercialized on an infrastructure level to eliminate food waste over the next 5 years from supermarkets and turn that all into an animal feed and fertilizer. And from the policy perspective, I think that the small farmers are tremendously important because I think the consumers are driving what they want to eat, how they want to eat. The transparency within their food supply situation is important to the consumer now. But I think also from our perspective, as we look at things as an infrastructure level, it's how do we also create a more environmentally sensible, sensitive way for the conventional farmer. And I think that needs to be a topic of this conversation as well, because that is, at the end of the day, we are all talking about sustainability and environmental initiatives for the future to meet the millennial goals, to meet higher and better initiatives for this environment. We need to transition the conventional farmer and give them ways to be incentivized to become more environmentally sensible with their farming practices, yet still in an economically, commercially viable way.
We're going to talk about conservation next, but if there's anyone else who wants to follow up. Oh, yes. I can't read your thing. Introduce yourself, please. Thank you. Oh, Philip Hodgins from Oakstone Farms.
Oakstone Farm. Hi, I'm one of the small farmers.
Thank you so much for being here. I often get frustrated that we have these discussions without farmers, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. So this is my first round table, so if I stumble, bear with me. So I would just like to add the supply chain has been our biggest struggle. So we raise cattle, and we also raise hogs, and I've been fortunate, as well as some of my partners, where we're first generation, and we come, from, another background. So I was fortunate to be in the financial industry. I've got some capital. When I look at farmers around me, and I look at what we're struggling with, is we have product, and I'm from New York State, and our farmers do everything right. We are conscientious about the environment. We're extraordinarily conscientious about our animals. Most farms have less than 50 head of cattle. Most farms have, maybe 50 pigs. And their biggest struggle is, how do we sell them? And just recently, we've had 2 large cooperatives pull out of New York State because we could not handle the supply. So we don't have direct access to big business because we don't have the numbers. And so I'm watching the quality of life for farmers struggle. And we talk about technology or creating opportunities for younger farmers. When they look at the mother and father farm, they're like, why in God's name would I want to do this? Look what mom and dad are going through because they can't sell their product. So I think what becomes really important is to establish, whether it's a food hub, whether it's direct access to larger ag, where we're looked at equally as the more mature marketplaces. So, for instance, maybe New York State is dairy-centric, but a lot of dairies, because of the conventional milk price, need to subsidize their income with beef. But right now, they've got no way to sell their product. So what do? They have to go to the local auction house, sell it at a 30% discount to an aggregator that's buying them at a discount, squeezing the small farmer and selling them to big business. That's not right. And so we need to figure a way how to fix that. And, Yeah, so that's why I'm happy to be part of this discussion. I've got many ideas, but and again, similar to Carlos representing El Salvador, I represent New York State. I am a New York State farmer, but I look what myself and my partners are doing, and we're saying, okay, if we can help this model where we can help our farmers around us to buy their product to sell into a bigger market, it becomes sustainable. So again, I think it needs to be local. Here we are in New York State, and less than 1% of our product goes to New York City. I can't sell to New York City. That's crazy.
Wow.
So how do we fix that? And so that's where I think these discussions help to try to create channels where we can raise product. We're not a factory. We're small independent farmers. People have been raising cattle or livestock or crops the way their parents and their grandparents have been doing for generations. But still, there's got to be a way for that farmer to get their product into a market, most importantly, at a fair price that allows them to live the same quality of life that I am able to do working in the financial industry.
Yeah, thank you so much for your perspective. I don't know that enough folks are even aware of the co-op issues in New York, so thanks for raising that. I'm going to follow up on that. Elizabeth, do you want to follow up? Yeah.
I'll make it quick because I know you want to move on to the next question, but I just want to thank you, Philip. That's an excellent point, and from our vantage point as a global company in agriculture and food, it's fundamental. It's the growth of farmer organizations and cooperatives is really a rich opportunity for public policy and public-private partnerships. A large company like Cargill, they are a key partner in our value chain and our supply chain because it's not feasible or practical for our company to have tens of thousands of individual relationships in order to have a supply chain. So how we can partner, how we can disseminate knowledge, farmer cooperatives or organizations, there's different models, help that farmer leverage their power in the market. It's a vehicle to encourage the youth to come in and try to do professional development, and so that people are seeing it as a viable business. And then in developing countries, they are absolutely fundamental for getting out knowledge and inputs and training and finance to subsistence farmers, to moving them to commercial farmers. So I guess one of the takeaways for today is focus on the farmer and how you can build their power in the market.
Yeah, I didn't foresee us having such clear parallels domestically and abroad, but it's fascinating. Do you want to provide closing remarks?
Yeah, this is a bit of a subtopic building on Beth's comment about innovation and the central question of how can public-private partnerships overcome some of these challenges. Eric Schmidt, when he was speaking, this has to do with innovation, that Silicon Valley is on board with and big food is on board with, Cargill, ADM, Tyson, and other companies, but we haven't seen any public funds for this sort of research yet. Eric Schmidt at the Milk and Global Summit was asked to talk about 6 technological innovations that he thinks will improve life for humanity by a factor of at least tenfold in the fairly near future. And Eric Schmidt, of course, is the former CEO of Google. He's the current chair of the board of the parent company Alphabet. So we talked about mostly things you would expect somebody in that position to talk about. He talked about 3D printers for infrastructure. He talked about self-driving cars. He talked about watches that know you're sick before you know you're sick. But the first thing that he brought up was the idea of plant-based meat and clean meat. So innovative alternatives to conventional animal agriculture. He called it nerds over cattle. And basically his argument is that the way we're producing food right now, as probably most people around the table know, conventional animal agriculture, it's inefficient. So we're not going to feed 9.7 billion people by 2050 with something that's so inefficient. And it's also a significant contributor to climate change. So for Eric Schmidt, he said, this is how we feed the developing world. So the question of food policy is foreign policy. This is how we get inexpensive protein to the 800 million people who are living in nutritional deficit. So we've seen people like Bill Gates calling this the future of food. We've seen Eric Schmidt excited about it. We've seen some of the biggest Silicon Valley venture firms excited about it. including Cargill being involved in a funding round for Memphis Meats just a week or two ago. So we've got big food, and we've got sort of Silicon Valley innovation. And then we have farmers. So like at the Good Food Institute, we're working with the Dry Pea and Lentil Association because recent plant-based meat innovation in peas mean that there aren't enough peas. So basically getting farmers to sort of divert over to crops that can be turned into plant-based meat. Be very exciting to see the government. One of the few things that wasn't cut in the most recent budget was the Agricultural Research Service. It spends more than $1 billion a year on R&D in agriculture. We think it would be exciting to see some of those R&D funds going toward this alternative technology, which could be very good domestically and also very good internationally.
It's a fascinating topic. And just to bring us back to changes to Title III, you could imagine a world in which there's plant-based clean meat technology that's commercialized and maybe being exported. I don't know if that's, because you could go to market access programs, and maybe that's what you'll be lobbying on. I have no idea. Okay, so we actually need to switch to the second. Oh, really quickly, yes. Macani Toungara from TechnoServe. You want to do one last point, and then we're going to switch gears. Yeah.
So I just wanted to make a quick plug. We get funding from USDA to work in cash crops. So we work internationally in cashew, cocoa, coffee. And it's cash crops that really can drive revenue for smallholder farmers. So we're talking about who's interested in farming. Rice and soybeans are great, but they rarely make any farmer rich because they're so commoditized. And USAID right now has a Feed the Future policy, and a lot of that is around rice and soybean and other types of commodities. So USAID isn't really driving the crops that are going to help revolutionize farming for smallholder farmers abroad and help to stabilize and engage youth and do all the good things and positive things that we want for our trade partners. But USDA, through funding from through the Farm Bill, is funding that. And so I just wanted to, from a policy perspective, just advocate for those windows to stay available. Because even as we talk about America First and American jobs, those cash crops abroad also have benefits, as a colleague from Cargill indicated, in terms of processing domestically and also for domestic consumers who enjoy their coffee and cashews and chocolate. So I'm hoping that it's not lost in the negotiation, the benefits, the follow-on benefits of continuing those kinds of international investments as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a
Can
great
I just,
point.
I'm sorry, I didn't define clean meat. So for people who don't know,
yes.
it's just meat grown directly from cells. So it's
Yeah,
an alternative.
lab-grown meat.
Sometimes called lab-grown meat,
Yeah.
which is a
I don't know
less-
if you guys
less
are trying to
pleasant way of
rebrand, but
describing it.
that's what I call it. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, we're gonna switch gears to conservation. I know we could talk about any one of these topics for hours, and I would keep you here, but I am told to stay on track here. So our second scenario, which you have in front of you, is changes to Title II, which is conservation. Conservation funding provides critical tools and programs to farmers and ranchers working to preserve their land for generations to come. Farm Bill grants and other sources of funding are critical to support farmers' decisions to implement sustainability practices, whether they're cover crops or watershed programs. These two are constantly facing the prospect of cuts or restricted funding or just really limited resources to expand them. What does this mean for federal food conservation policies under the 2008 Farm Bill? I know we started to talk about some of these environmental practices and environmental angles, but certainly there's a title specific to this, and I totally, I think your point about looking at titles separately and not holistically is a really good one, and probably a good topic for like a future conference, actually. But I don't know if there's anyone who specifically wants to kick us off on conservation. I mean, I'm tempted to kick it to our farmer, who would actually probably have a direct understanding of how these programs work. So let's start with you.
Again, we've been fortunate to have been involved in a couple different environmental / conservation programs. So our farm sits on the upper Susquehanna watershed. So we feed ultimately into the Chesapeake, and runoff through herbicides, pesticides, or even manure runoff is obviously detrimental to the watershed. So we've been able to work closely with our National Resource Conservation Services Group, as well as our local soil and water and also through nonprofit organizations such as the Upper Susquehanna Watershed Coalition to implement rotational grazing practices. We actually have developed in Otsego County the first solar-powered pumping station to pump water uphill, so we can then feed water downhill to rotationally graze our cattle. Through the carbon mitigation program, through the Farm Bill, we heavily utilize cover crops. So after we take our corn off, we go in and we plant a cover crop, which gives us additional feed for our cattle, while at the same time preventing erosion, to our watersheds. So we're blessed in New York State with tremendous water and tremendous grass, so it's critical we protect our water. But also, a lot of these programs we've been fortunate to have been covered. It creates great seasonal jobs. We have custom operators come in to do a lot of our planting. And just recently, with Penn State, through their agricultural department, they invented a simple tool called an interseeder. And what that does, it allows one to go in and actually plant in between, a cover crop in between corn rows. And so when you take your corn off, you don't have to then go in and plant, but you have an established seed bed, which automatically takes, mitigates erosion, and also, helps with carbon mitigation as well. So if that were cut, from the Farm Bill, it would have a huge impact. It creates, it helps, it does provide income to the farm. It helps support, the large investment in machinery that we need to use to plant, and it's doing a great job, for the environment.
So can you put that in a little bit broader context for those of us who are not farmers and who are not feeding the world? When you're looking at an operation, how do you think about the financial incentives that exist for these programs? Is it sort of part of your, revenue stream, that you're looking at broadly, or just help folks think about, imagine kind of what that looks like to a business, right? Because these programs are all sort of different. Some of them pay you to keep land out, some pay you to do buffers, or, they're just different mechanisms. So could you give us a little bit of a sense of how you think about it that way?
It's a great incentive to do the right thing. Again, farmers want to do the right thing. But unfortunately, with as Macani mentioned, soybean production or corn production, at least in New York State, which can't compete with the Midwest, it's difficult to sustain your income selling soybeans or corn. So the added income from planting, from being allowed to plant cover crops, which again, it's not the subsidy is not there to effectively be income. It's there to help offset costs. But again, if you're the farm and you own the equipment and you're able to go out and buy the seed, you effectively can monetize that, to help cover farm expenses. So, where a farm in itself will not rely, at least the farmers I deal with won't rely as subsidy as income to help them remain sustainable. It's an incentive that encourages them to be sustainable. And to be quite blunt, a lot of folks do it even without the incentive because it's the right thing to do.
I was just in Israel and Jordan, and we talked a lot about the issue of water, and they just came to an agreement in Israel and Jordan with the PLO and Jordan around the issue, and obviously Israel came up with the idea of the drip technology. So it's clear to me, and looking at other places, obviously models things. Do you sense those are some of the things that we can do here?
Absolutely. And even it's funny, even just recently, and again, I'm not an expert on this. One of my partners is. There was recently a pilot program to bring back industrial hemp.
Right.
And industrial hemp could be vital to the New York economy.
Correct.
In the sense that it's effectively a weed, right? And not, all pun intended, not the weed we smoke. But it acts, one, as a tremendous cover crop. It helps you could plant it in degraded soils. And through this pilot, we've been able to work with pasta companies, with juice companies, with salad companies. So if you look at the diversification of product, at the same time, it's creating a buffer and preventing erosion because it goes, into soils that may have also been acclimated to, to runoff. So when you talk about different drip technologies or water, again, utilizing these different programs or, innovations are extraordinarily useful and I think would be, very sought after.
I'm just so pleased we've integrated hemp in the conversation.
Yes.
It just really delights me. We could. Oh, wonderful. Yes. Hello. We met yesterday. Yeah. The floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Itamar Glazer, and I'm from the Volcani Institute in Israel. You just mentioned, did you visit our organization?
Yes, I visited.
Yeah, very good. Anyway, I just wanted to comment. I heard quite a lot, and I would like to comment on some of the previous issues, and also I'm looking at the perspective of the Israeli experience and also from the research or the development issues. So if we're talking about policies, development of policies, one of the things that, and farming and issues of farming, one of the problems or the issues or the challenges that we found is that in order to make a policy, you need some technology and you need tools to provide the farmers, provide the customer, provide the population with the proper technologies to make the change. So in order to produce in a better or more sustainable way, you have to find the right technologies to do it, either to develop better utilization of water, to better, to reduce the input of agriculture, pesticides, agriculture, fertilizers and things like that. For example, development of precision agriculture and the other means and the other tools. At the Volcani organization, Volcani, by the way, I've been asked by many people, has nothing to do with the volcano. It is named after a person that founded it. His name was Volkansky, so if everybody wants to know. And by the way, I don't know if you notice, I did, and I'm very proud of it, the logo of Volcani is right on the screens here next to Concordia, which is a great honor. I really appreciate it. Anyway, we change our perspective of the way that we are doing research, not in terms of the practical issues, but we looked for many, many years of the needs of the farmers, the need of the people that are producing the food. Now we are looking at the need of the customer. So we are the needs of the final users of the products. So we are focusing on beside the practical of agriculture, we're also looking at two main things now. One is the preservation, the sustainability, and the impact of agriculture on the environment. And we are developing tools to help the farmers to produce better and produce in a reasonable way to do it. Without our help, without this kind of development, no matter how great will the farmers will have, as you mentioned, they will not be able to do it. On the other side of the spectrum, we are developing tools to reduce the consumption of food by reducing the losses. In the worldwide, the losses of food after being harvested is about 40%. And we are developing tools to reduce the losses of production in the process of transportation, on the shelf life of on the shelf of the supermarkets, and even in our refrigerator. Each one of us is throwing a lot of food every week. So I think that what I want to make, the point that I want to make from this is that the research and development is geared now to provide tools, to provide technologies for the world to change the policies and make them more sustainable and make them and to make a better world, a better future for the world?
Basically, make agricultural research great again, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing. I hear that a lot. Dr. Rodi Hawkins.
Rody Hawkins,
Yes, from Improved Nature.
Yes.
Thank you.
I felt like I needed to talk because Bruce kind of introduced me over there without actually mentioning my name when he was talking about plant-based meats. But I've been in the food business for over 30 years. I've worked for two of the largest food companies, Kraft and Conagra, and I've done work for over 100 different food companies, including Nestle's and General Mills and others.
Did you invent the Lunchable?
Yeah, I did. And
I
did
saw
lunch.
it in your bio. I just think it's
I
worth
did do the
highlighting.
Lunchable,
I
so.
loved the Lunchable.
And the Slim
anyway,
Jim.
I don't want to derail you, but that
I didn't
had
really
to be noted.
develop the
yes.
Slim Jim, but I helped grow that market, develop that market in the meat snack market. If you see a lot of all that product in the convenience stores, yes, I was beyond the creation of a lot of the technology that went into that. And I was at a meeting about over 20 years ago at a production meeting, and they were trying to figure out how to get more product out of their production plant using the same resources and the same equipment. And they told me how much they needed to do, and I said, yes, I can do that. I'll get that done for you. I walked out of the meeting, and an industrial engineer came to me and said, Rody, what you just promised is impossible. I said, what do you mean it's impossible? He said, I've done all the numbers, I've looked at all the standards, and it can't be done. I said, oh, don't worry about it. I'm going to change the standards. And that's the way I look at a problem. I don't look at what we have right now. I look at changing the standards. And what Bruce was talking about here is that is what Improved Nature is doing right now. We are changing the standards. And what we're doing, we're taking plant protein and turning it into a product that has the same eating qualities, same nutritional properties, and the same cooking properties as the animal products we're replacing. And we're doing that and collapsing the supply chain such that we're now 20 times more efficient in producing a product that has all those qualities than animal agriculture. So what we're doing, we're collapsing the supply chain and becoming 20 times more efficient in producing a strip, a tender, a fillet, a nugget. And we actually have a product here that you can try that we've shown. It's the easiest product for us to bring to a conference like here. We have a jerky out here. And so what you were talking about the Slim Jim, yeah, the meat snack, I know how to make beef jerky. I've made that on like 5 different continents around the world. So I understand that market. So you're looking, and so Bruce and I have been at a lot of different conferences together. I'm a meathead, I'm a meat guy, and now I'm doing plant-based products. And I think that's right. That's how you feed, how do you feed 10 billion people without, I mean, you're going to do the farm industry has done a very, very good job of feeding us to now. But as the population keeps growing, we're not making any more land, and water is becoming in short supply. So we're able to do that. And one other interesting thing about our technology, our product, it's shelf stable. We can ship it anywhere in the world, and you can have an eating experience that you're having today and a quality of protein that you need to have today and feed the world.
So we all need to try the beef jerky afterward.
Yes, please do.
I'm very curious.
And I can do better than what I'm showing you today.
It's the beginning. It's the beginning. Okay, we have many. I'm going to kick it to Philip Miller from Monsanto next. I know others want to weigh in.
So I'm Philip Miller. I'm with Monsanto, but I also will tell you I have a large soybean and corn operation farm in Missouri. So I always look through the lens of the farmer, and I want to echo a lot of what Philip's already said. You know, I think farmers here, and then I think many places I've been around the world, are conservationists and they want to do the right thing. So I think a lot of these things with the Farm Bill, also, it's not about revenue generation. It's allowing us to, I have 400 acres of wetland on my land that I have to think about, and as well as I have a family that's coming behind me that I have to think about, and I want to leave that and preserve that environment for them. It allows us to experiment and try new things to say what works in our operation and how do we deliver on that end. So I just want to echo as a farmer that those components are critical. Maybe one of the things, just to build on what we're hearing here, I think there's a lot of disruptive technologies that are coming out there, and I think we're just beginning to see the effect of digital agriculture insights and analytics and how you can apply that to agriculture, whether it's a farmer that's doing production, be more precise about it, to opening up ways to market products and game products. And I really think it's in areas, whether it's conservation, whether it's the previous conversation that we've had, that we've underestimated, and I think we're just beginning to see the impact it can have if we're creative, open-minded about how we use those new tools and technologies. The other thing, and I get the opportunity to travel around the world, is we often think of these things as tools that work in a developed country. But the reality is, you know, I can go to India, farmers that have 2 to 3 acres, and just the cell phone and the ability to use information and get those information and create people that are willing to consolidate that information and get it to them, whether it's their market or whether it's how they run their farming operation, is transforming, you know, agriculture and its scale independent. So, you know, I think those are some of the things we have to think about, whether it's the research programs, the involvement of Silicon Valley that I heard earlier, that's really going to make a difference to whether we can feed 10 billion people.
So maybe
it's
more,
to the R&D
yeah.
programs as well. You know, think out of the box versus the traditional agronomy approaches of where we have invested our dollars in R&D.
All right, I'm going to throw it back to Sam Garwin from Fleischer, right? Yeah.
Fleischers, yeah, thank you. I think that the technology is great. I think that I'm actually, as a strange coming from butcher shop, but I'm in favor of plant-based protein. That said, I think it has to be both. I don't think we can just say, oh, we messed up the earth, I guess let's move on and use technology now. I think that now we are coming to terms with the fact that there is a way of raising animals on the land that actually improves the land, and it has a name now. It's called regenerative agriculture, and there is science that shows that when you put animals back on the land, that they actually improve the ability of the health of the soil. They can reduce erosion. They can increase the ability of the plants to sequester carbon. And you know, we can fix it. We should be fixing the land while we're also looking at these alternative forms of protein. I think it's a mistake to think that conservation and profits are juxtaposed. In fact, regenerative agriculture is proving that they are not, because the more that you do regenerative agriculture, the lower the inputs need to be to raise animals. 100% grass-fed animals, as the soil improves, the quality of the grass improves, you have to buy fewer supplements for your animals. And so over time, not only does the quality of the soil improve, the health of the animal improve, the health of the economy locally improve, but your profits will also increase. So I think that, you know, there are ways to incentivize production in more environmentally sustainable ways by looking at it over a longer term. And I will also say that Fleischers actually voluntarily offers incentives to farmers above and beyond the commodity pricing to raise animals in a better way. And our rationale for that is that there is market demand now, especially in places like New York City. People will pay more for animals that they know have been raised better. And so we are able to offer a premium above market prices for animals that have been raised the way that we think they should be raised.
Interesting. I'm going to throw it. I can't read your full name. Next to Sam.
It's Juan Barrientos. I'm from Colombia. I'm a chef. I also have a restaurant in Miami. And I've been thinking about who's not here. And it's 2.5 billion people in the world live from family agriculture, and probably they don't have the money to even to have a visa to come here or to have issued their passport. So if we are talking about food policy and the future, and we're talking about 70% of agriculture in Latin America is family agriculture. 80% of Asian of the agriculture is family agriculture in Asia, and in Africa is 80%. So we're talking about 2.5 million people. So we have to develop policy starting from them. That's my whole point, because I do respect a lot of what we are calling now a small farmer. But what's a farmer? A small farmer here, it's like a huge company in any country in Asia, in any country in Latin America, or any country in Africa. So a small farmer here it's very big. So we have to start putting the right names and start thinking about who's not here, because if we're talking about future, we're talking about all the environment. An North American spends 3 times more food than a Latin America because of the waste of the food. So I think we have to start like putting the right names and having all the representation or thinking of who's not here. And the third issue that I wanted to put here is that water is going to become a very, very big issue in the future, in the short future. Like 20 years ago, we used to say the wars is going to be in 100 years, but I think it's going to be like in 10 to 20 years, we're going to start fighting for water. And now we have a kilo of tomato, it's grown for 50 liters of water. You have different measures here, and a kilo of cattle or meat is 15,000 liters of water. So I think we have to start having really strong water policy and start taxing the impact of water, the impact of food of water, so we can tax less a tomato and more a beef. And if I want to eat a beef because I love beef, but I will have to pay a tax because of the water impact that is doing the world. Sorry for my English.
No, that was very, very interesting, and I think the point's very. That's a very important point to make. Who's not here? What do you think, Congressman? Do you think the Agriculture Committee might consider taxing food based on how much water? I mean, maybe. What? It's really interesting.
It's the first time that I've ever heard with what you just expressed. But what I was most interested in is I said that in my trip, which was in Israel and Jordan, I heard a great deal about the issue about water. So I'm hearing you say it. I mean, that was the issue in the discussion there. Was the whole issue around water, and I agree with you about water policy, something we don't take as granted, but in Israel, I know that drilled down. So there's a lot that we have to learn. That's kind of what I was saying earlier about not us being locked into categories. I understand what you're saying. I think because it's traditionally the way it's been done. You're correct. I mean, I think it's 12 titles, as I recall, 12 titles that are there, and this discussion has been going on from 1933 to where we are in 2017. And this discussion here is broadening. And also, I was saying to Philip a little bit, I was going to ask him, would he recommend to his family to go into farming? I mean, that's what I'm most curious about, because I know that the average age of farmers in the ballpark of 60 and older is about 60 and older. And it depends on, being that the people are not here, who you said in Africa and Latin America, maybe older than that. So I'm just curious about, would you recommend,
Absolutely. Actually, our oldest son is 18, right, and he was all set to go down to Texas, and he had a change of heart. And
change of heart about
going to school, just for the sake of going to school. Right. And he is looking at opportunities in let's call it health services, whether it be farming or whether it be nutrition, and he's gotten very involved in what we're doing with regard to the industrial hemp, and as it relates to physical fitness. So I think the younger generation is extraordinarily interested in nutrition. I think you see it, as Sam mentioned, with let's call it the millennial movement towards cleaner food. And again, I think the old adage used to be that clean food could only be bought in major cities, but I'm in a rural area, and I'm starting to see a lot more attention being paid to the quality of food, and if it costs more, then possibly they eat less. So with that said, I think the younger generation is interested in farming. I think there needs to be more education as to how somebody can become a farmer. I was fortunate to have had the capital to go out and buy a farm and buy machinery. If you're a young person who wants to farm, how do you have access to capital? And again, I think it's out there. And I think the Farm Bill, again, is important to this. But if I look locally at a lot of the incentives that are offered through the different capital projects that the government offers, or either through public-private partnerships or joint lending affairs, most rural farmers don't understand how to get access to that, may not know how to fill out the paperwork, or quite frankly, feel insecure. You know, maybe they missed a credit card payment or they had defaulted, and so they don't feel they have the financial standards to obtain that financing. So, if we want to lower the age of farmers and allow folks to farm, I think there needs to be an improvement in the rural education process that helps young folks understand how to get the capital or how to move into farming. And I think there's a way for public-private partnerships, whether it be through private equity or what have you, where we have REITs, right, where big corporates go out and buy massive amounts of apartment buildings and rent them out. Well, why can't we do the same with farmland and allow young farmers to work their way into owning a farm, or mentor a farm, and knowing that they've got a stable job for future? And you want to talk about how to preserve local economies. If you look at upstate New York, and we talk about, we want to take one step further into the opioid epidemic and all that. I mean, by helping sustain a local economy, through agriculture, you're going to improve the livelihoods and, negate a lot of the negativity that's occurred with the increasing age of farmers and the lack of young folks wanting to go into farming. So I think education is a big step. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to kick it to some voices we haven't heard. Lauren, Herzer, Rise, did I get
Risi,
that?
like the Risi Cup. Yeah. From the Wilson Center. Thank you very much. If you bear with me, I kind of wanted to connect a few points that I think are really important. I don't, this gets a little bit to what Elise had been talking about with silos, and when Manuel had been, sorry, that's right, about water. You can't talk about food security without talking about water security, and you can't talk about food security without talking about conflict globally, right? So if you look at the 10 of the 13 most food insecure places, a lot of that is being driven by conflict. And so that gets to the ambassador's point about the opportunities for diplomacy and development. But I think that you need to bring in that third D, which is the defense community, the military community, and tying in opportunities to look across the 3D, so defense, diplomacy, and development, I recognize opportunities for peace building over these issues. So in the Middle East, we have Eco-Peace Middle East in Israel, Jordan, and Palestine, which has been bringing communities together over water for over 20 years. And this, I think, is an area where food could play a large role and is already playing a large role. But we need to recognize the impact that conflict can have on food and that food can have on conflict. So we say we can't be food smart without being conflict smart, and we can't be conflict smart without being food smart. And it's a little bit harder to tie that to the domestic discussion because we have strong governing institutions here, and we are able to manage insecurities in a way that a lot of developing world is not just yet. But I just wanted to make that point before we move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, Michael Rowland from
Morgan Stanley, although I did resign this morning, so it's a little awkward.
Oh, you did?
But
Making news. That might be news.
that aside,
Really? Wow.
the comment
We could have
of
updated the table tents.
So I write for a food column for Forbes, which is my main, I think, reason for being here today. And the conversation around water, I think, is really critical. And I would imagine that the receptivity of anything with the word tax in it is probably going to be on the low side. And one of the things that I've come to learn around water is that there's really not an effective mechanism for pricing it across the country, and that there's really no water market. And that could be a really interesting thing to explore in the committee for the Farm Bill, is to maybe create a more efficient water pricing mechanism that in and of itself would sort of act as a tax. Because if water is priced more effectively, people are probably going to use it more effectively. And from what I've learned, and I'm not an expert in this by any means, water should be a lot more expensive in certain areas and less in others, and there's just not a lot of efficiency in that. So whether it's the idea of creating an actual water market like there's an oil market, or something along those lines that create more of a transparent pricing mechanism, might be a lot more palatable from a political perspective and actually more effective in the long run.
Fascinating. Are you a farmer as well? Do we have another farmer in the, yes?
Yeah, I'm the other farmer.
Love it. Let's hear your thoughts. And I can't see your name tag, so I can't introduce
Frank
you.
Trennecost, Boomy Farms, East Hampton. I'm a organic vegetable farmer.
All right. What kind of vegetables?
Just mixed vegetables: kale, lettuce, tomatoes, peppers.
Not just vegetables.
Everything. No potatoes though.
No potatoes. Okay.
So I just wanted to speak to sustainability and the decisions we face as a farm every day about balancing short and long term, and also we do have a margin hit when we decide to be better stewards. We decided not to use policy to help us. We thought that it was better for us to include the consumer as a stakeholder to the farm. So instead of our decisions being met with ambivalence by the consumer, we thought we would reimagine the fence line and not have two factions, the farmer and the customer, but imagine the customer and the farmer as being one. And by this all comes through education. So there's certain things we don't do. So we don't put plastic on the field. We use paper instead of plastic as a weed suppressant, and that comes at a higher cost. It comes at a higher cost initially, and then also the maintenance of it is higher. But if we communicate our beliefs around this to the consumer and they buy in, then we could pass pricing on to them. And it goes on like this as far as spraying fungicides or anything else we could do that maybe is in the letter of the organic law, but is not in the spirit of the law as we see it. So if we get buy-in from our consumers, we get pricing. So we decided to go a different tact, and we decided that education is incumbent on the farmer. And we decided that without a consumer that doesn't value what we're doing in terms of managing the land or managing water, then really over the long term or medium term, our efforts are lost. Or our short term, our efforts are lost. So we start with education. We invite children to come to the field. We invite families to come to the field. And I know this probably isn't really possible if you're exporting. But for us, we're a community farm. And so those are our beliefs. And it's not easy. I mean, we're met with difficulties every day. And we're met with these choices about what to do. But we believe that if we stay the course, that in the medium term, in the long term, even the short term, then the families will benefit in terms of having great food, and then the land will benefit and benefit farmers after us.
Mm-hmm. So you, just so I don't get this straight, you've opted out of participating in any of the USDA conservation programs?
Yeah, I don't even know. Yeah. We're only a 20-acre farm, 16
yeah.
acres. And yeah, I mean, if you're...
So you're really offering like an alternative model, then the Farm Bill is not.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's fascinating.
As long as it doesn't impede us,
mm-hmm.
But there are some things that are really not cost effective for a smaller farmer, which would be met with difficulty by us and other smaller farmers. Mm-hmm. But in terms of cover cropping and all those sort of things, and just managing the land properly, we think that for us and maybe other farms our size, the best avenue is not relying on the government, but perhaps educating the consumer mm-hmm. and making them a stakeholder within the farm.
So how do you reach your consumers? Do you use social media, email? What is?
No, I mean social media is no. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I mean, you could send them like a nice picture of a tomato, but really two tomatoes are completely different. Aside from the way they look, the way they nourish is completely different. The way they were grown.
Well, in your caption, you could explain the difference. Is what I'm saying.
Sorry.
Or are you Snapchatting it, or I don't know.
It's all.
Are you sending paper? Handwritten letters. I'm just.
It's outreach at the markets. It's outreach at the farm stand.
So in person.
It's meeting the chefs. Yeah. It's having the chefs continue your message to their consumers.
Right.
It's a lot of grassroots work.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Okay. Who else wants to weigh in? Oh yes, we have not heard. I can't. Yes. So it's Gigi Lee Chang from Food Future CEO. Did I get that right?
Yes. Yes. Gigi with Food Future Co.
I really wanted to kind of tie together some comments and really sort of this idea of corporate policy. And I think that Frank really brought a fine point to it, and that I personally think, as much as we're talking about, the Farm Bill and policy, sometimes it's really just the role of business to leapfrog that, unfortunately. Or fortunately, because as he says, as long as it doesn't hinder him, he can work outside of that and find solutions that work for him that actually are ultimately better for his business and for the community. So here at Food Future Co., we work with early stage companies and help them to scale and find, I guess, like their innovations around bettering the food ecosystem. So we say that our mission is helping the entrepreneurs that are on a mission. And for myself, I am an entrepreneur. I came into sort of the food business 12 years ago. And in that industry, there is so much around social entrepreneurship and, companies that are working, it started really with fair trade, as well as now it's much more about transparency, supply chain, ingredients, manufacturing processes, all of that. And I think as much as we're talking about the role of big companies, I think it's very important to look at the smaller companies and the innovation and the flexibility that they are providing and how deep they're going into their ecosystems and touching each point along the value chain, from those individual farmers in the remote countries to how they're affecting how retailers think about the products that they're buying. I would also add that from that perspective, in terms of entrepreneurship and business and the intersection and the role that it has in this larger conversation is, farmers are businesses too. And so how do we think about putting in policies or programs that help to educate, farmers around a business and not just the farming business, but the business of profit and loss. And, and you feel it every day in terms of, what happens and the price at market and stuff, but thinking proactively about it. So, and I think there's one good example, although it's probably not the best example, but it's one example, is there's a company here in Brooklyn called Square Roots, and it's sexy because it's Kimball Musk and it's, urban agriculture. But yes, they're teaching 18 to 24-year-olds how to farm, but really what they're teaching them is to be an entrepreneur. And that's ultimately the skill that I think needs to be, worked on and programs are developed around. So
fascinating. I know, Beth, you've been waiting. Apologies.
Couple of points. So, Michael, I would love to see the government and some, whether it's Farm Bill or somewhere, tackle the water markets. I think a challenge that's part of that is just looking at the differences between Eastern U.S. water law and Western U.S. water law. Because until you have the same legal system governing the use of the water, it's hard to price that water. That's one thing. I think also, when talking about the conservation title, I think it's worth using the words also resilience and risk mitigation, because a lot of the reason that farmers are doing these conservation practices helps that I don't think it's because you're trying to be, a tree-hugging farmer necessarily. It's because this is a way to make your production system a healthier, stronger, more resilient, more risk, better able to bounce back from risk or have less risk in your system. So I think those are important terms to consider. Also, I'm not sure this is quite for the conservation title, but I'm not sure where to stick it relative to Farm Bill. But there seems to be a bit of an increasing body of research showing that with climate change, the nutritional content of food is changing, and there's a growing leaning towards raised carbohydrate content, and I think decreased certain mineral content. And so that's certainly got nutritional impacts for the consumer. And I think that's something, A, we want to make sure we understand well, and B, we think about as we're thinking about what crops are being grown or how are we supporting different practices and crops. Just a couple more things. I think we're seeing a lot of food and beverage companies coming out with public commitments around sustainability and sustainable agriculture. And I think we could probably do a better job of trying to link the conservation practices and conservation programs in the Farm Bill to what these companies are doing, so that when Philip or Frank are implementing a certain conservation practice, you can easily, turn to your customer and say, and this satisfies this part of some sustainability program. And then a question for the farmers. When I worked for NRCS, I understood the incentive payments to be like a 3-year payment that was meant to sort of help you swallow some of the risk or meet the risk of changing a practice in what you're doing. It was not meant to be like an ongoing payment. It just sort of helped you swallow the change. Is that how you guys would, I guess you're not involved in those, but is that how you guys would see those payments?
Yeah, they're typically for a defined period of time.
Yeah.
I'm just so glad we have farmers here. I just thank you for that. Yeah. We have to transition to specialty crops and Title 10, or we're not going to get to it, because I promised we would stay on time. And thanks for actually raising the CO2. That was actually my story last week. And I think that really ties back into agricultural research, and just so many of these issues come back to that, having the ability or the technologies to address these things, whether it's clean meat or plant-based meat or water, reducing the environmental footprint. So really in the conservation, we should have been doing conservation and research probably together, because there's so much overlap there, and they are separate titles, but obviously very related. So scenario 3. Changes to Title 10, which is the specialty crops and horticulture title, which I don't believe we had until about 10 years ago. I think it's a new title, which a lot of folks in the farm, or I guess food and farm policy now, are kind of surprised by that, but maybe they're not surprised, because I think there's a lot of understanding that so much historically of our farm policy is focused on more traditional, mainstream, large-scale crops like corn, soy, cotton, sugar, and all sorts of other products that we rely on. So our scenario is transitioning to a healthier, more sustainable global food supply depends upon the formation of new and more efficient linkages between stakeholders along the food supply chain. Many of these innovations are being driven by local and regional-based agricultural products, farmers markets, local food programs, organic research, all of which fall under Title 10. What type of additional public sector support for specialty crops and horticulture is necessary in order to keep pace with consumer demand and private sector innovation? And I'm tempted to go straight back to our vegetable farmer, if you have any thoughts about, maybe the Farm Bill, I don't know if you've ever, or there's growers near you that do like the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program or the Specialty Crop Research Initiative, or if there's research needs that you feel are important, but I think it would be great to hear from you first.
There's
Frank.
a pretty robust SNAP program at the farmers market we go to, and I think that's working well.
Are you seeing consumers use that? And they can get, like, do you do double up bucks, where consumers get extra dollar incentives at the farmers market if they buy fruits and vegetables?
I haven't encountered that. I think it's dollar for dollar, but
it's
pretty seamless, and for the farmer, our experience, our farm's been pretty easy. And it's actually nice to see families that otherwise could not afford these crops being able to afford them. And I think most farmers, or I can only speak for myself, I'd extend savings beyond what they get SNAP. So if there's some seconds or something, I'll happily give them to them also. So there's the policy, and then there's the principle, and at the markets to go hand in hand.
Does anyone want to talk about? You want to talk about specialty crops? The meat, our meat guy.
Well, I don't know where this exactly.
You can go back.
Fits.
It's okay.
So no, it's kind of in this policy. As we've creating these new things, these things are out there. The Ag Department or the USDA is slow to adapt with the changing food supply. So this is some of the things that need to look for. And one of the ones that's particularly of interest to us is the school lunch program. That is because of I think the agricultural bill, or the Department of Agriculture, some of the top programs is school lunch program, sustainable ethanol, and as well as the feeding programs. We call them food stamps, but I know there's another.
SNAP.
SNAP.
It's now
okay. I'm
SNAP,
sorry.
yeah.
I didn't want to be politically incorrect on that, but it's the
well,
SNAP
people
program.
still refer to it as food stamps because I think it's just baked in.
It's in my head.
Right.
That's all I
Right.
know.
I don't think
as
it's
food
pejorative.
stamps
Yeah.
today. So, and the school lunch program it actually promotes, it subsidizes a lot of those programs, and we have a product that actually could go right into that, but it's not understood what this is, and because we're so new. So, modifying that program and helping us to get into school lunch programs in a much easier way at a price point, we could be much more competitive in that part of it. Also, one of the other things about our particular product is that I said we were shelf stable, so we can actually take our product and ship it anywhere in the world, and then it would then be produced at whatever the local product that you want to feed the food supply. So we can put a food plant anywhere in the world, ship our product there, and then they can turn it into the local cuisine. If we want to put it into Israel, it could be, you can make all sorts of products from there. In fact, that's what we're doing. We are actually, two of our partners out of Israel. So we are going to be shipping to Israel. We're going to be shipping to Europe, and it's going to become the local product, whatever it is, all plant-based. So that's some good things about what we can do, be more efficient. And the other thing is, I want to hear what Maddie's going to say over here, because she hasn't talked yet. So I want her, we talked earlier, and I want her to talk about what she's doing, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, well, that's a good transition. Maddie, we'd love to hear what you're working on. Yeah.
I guess I'm talking. Hi, I'm Maddie from Toast Ale, which is a new beer company that is taking bread that would otherwise go to waste and actually turning it into craft beer. And then 100% of our profits will go to charities tackling the root causes of food waste. Although what I'm inclined to speak about is just, it seems like another kind of conversation that deserves to be brought into the room is the connection of food policy on the nutrition and public health outcomes of the urban poor. I mean, in the U.S. specifically, I think we think a lot about how to help smallholder farmers because we know that they are struggling and they are feeding us. And I think we think a lot about how to, improve the nutritional outcomes of, the urban poor. And to me, it seems quite simple that if we could just shorten the supply chain between the farmer and that consumer. I think that's just so often. I don't necessarily have a suggestion of how to do that, but I think I so often find myself in conversations like this, all about the farmer, and other conversations at public health kind of conferences, all about that side of things. And it seems like it's just very necessary for the thinking to come together and to really kind of shorten the supply chain and really circle that back around.
That's a great point, and I also experience the same thing. I cover I'm in farm bill conversations, or I'm in agriculture policy conversations, and then I'm in the nutrition and public health community, and they don't really talk to each other. It's kind of bizarre when you think about the holistic nature of how these all fit together. One program we could talk about is Farm to School, which we haven't, but that is one small but growing bipartisan part of farm policy where they're trying to sort of, get kids more connected to where their food comes from and actually meet farmers and do the local food thing. So we haven't heard from Evan Franca, so I'm going to kick it to you next.
Honored to be here and appreciate everybody's thoughts today. One thing I wanted to just bring up is kind of the numbers, because we've been talking about some incredible ideas and amazing initiatives. Obviously, school lunch. New York City just made school lunches free for the first time ever, so that's a step in the right direction. And going back to the numbers, it's obviously $500 billion program, the Farm Bill. A lot of the ideas that we talked about today only get about 1% of the total funding. So agricultural research, which we discussed, nutritional incentives, local food programs, fruits and vegetables, organic farming, rural business development, and young and beginning and minority farmers. All those initiatives combined make up only about 1% of the funding, and there are a lot of the ideas that we discussed in the room today. I'm not suggesting to take away from programs like SNAP or conservation or crop insurance or commodity subsidies, but I mean, surely we can grow that, and obviously there's talks now about reducing the budget for some of these programs, and I think taking it back, to our elected officials, these are things that we're obviously all echoing around the room that need attention and need funding. So I just wanted to bring that up and just kind of put it into a numbers.
Yeah, the numbers,
perspective.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what the numbers are. So I think the last Farm Bill, as it was broken down, was 80%. So it was estimated to be almost $500 billion over 10 years, but I think it's that's different. Over 5 years. 80% is nutrition, 9% is crop insurance subsidies, 6% is conservation, 5% is commodity subsidies, and then everything else beyond that. So, right. Just to provide that kind of big picture, because it covers so many things, it's easy to get lost. Okay, I'm going to go back to, I can't see your name, but yes, John.
I know we're getting close to our time, so maybe tying some things together and building off some of the last statements. You know, what we were getting to around conservation when we were talking about that was that policy has invested in a previous paradigm, in an old paradigm, concentration, commodity programs, and that's provided a lot of good. But what we're seeing emerging in all the examples, whether it be meats and grass-based, local food, entrepreneurship, is a new model. Doesn't necessarily negate the old model, like he was saying, but it's time for a new model. And it's the same in specialty crops, right? It's the same in specialty crops. If you think about the last administration had Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food, really more of an internal coordinating initiative. I think one big idea that we can consider now is an external one. You know, let's have an ag marketing for alternative food systems, alternative agricultures, that really ties together across the Farm Bill titles, from research to marketing to nutrition to rural development. Right? Its time has come. I mean, we're in a time, I did a doctorate on cover crops 20 years ago, and nobody cared, right? Nobody cared, but it's the same benefits now that we're having cover crops, and now all of a sudden cover crops are really hot, right? It's not just the academics on the side, it's industry, it's farmers, it's large foundations. So we're at a point where the time has come for a new paradigm in agriculture. Right? And we need to invest in that, and our policies need to reflect that and meet that challenge in an integrated way.
Yeah. I don't know who was next. Oh, you were waiting. I'm going to let USDA weigh in again. USDA, which oversees all things we're learning. Yeah.
Right.
Does all things.
So I just want to comment a little bit about research and about consumers. Consumers are really almost like the elephant in the room. You know, 80% of our budget is going to food assistance programs. We have an incredible obesity and overweight problem combined with a food insecurity problem. I mean, we've got it all. And it's so difficult of a problem. And we need to apply good science to this. Too often I hear easy answers, if only we didn't have food deserts, or if only we didn't have food swamps, or if only we wouldn't eat meat, or if only we, had cheap, free vegetables, or whatever. All of these things, if you start to look at the research, and there's been quite a nice compendium of research put together on these topics. If you start to look at that research, you're figuring out it takes everything. Not one of these things is going to be the answer, and this is a really difficult problem, and I really would make the plea that we don't focus on single responses and that we really adopt a suite of policies and programs to address the problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme I think we're emerging here. Yep.
I just wanted to emphasize, our case isn't the case for the United States, a small country, but as an anchor tenant, as they use in the real estate world, we are a leader in the supermarket industry there. We have roughly 63% of the market. We actually compete with Walmart. The point is, to really drive change across the value chain, you have to find those anchor tenants. And to find those anchor tenants, and as the congressman said, is not easy, especially when you're dealing with publicly traded companies, which are looking for quarterly returns in order to get their share price where they want to get it. This isn't easy work. It takes commitment from the top executives in a company saying, we're going to bet on, let's say, small farmers. That's going to affect the bottom line, possibly in the short term. But if they look at it from a different approach and how they can bring new customers to their company because they're doing things this way, they can get around that. But if big business in the big food business isn't willing to take those steps or make those short-term sacrifices for long-term gains, it's going to be difficult. And that's where I think public policy or government working with these big companies and sort of creating that consciousness can really help. Because I do not see vast change happening if we don't touch on those anchor tenants or those tractors, which we call in Spanish, in the end. It's not easy because when you start working with small farmers, the learning curve is steep, right? And the supply may not always be consistent. The quality may be more variable at times, but you have to walk along with them so that they can get to where they need to be in terms of competitiveness and quality. So I really would invite people who do public policy, the Department of Agriculture, to help guide these big businesses along and bring them in this path.
Yeah, it's just a lot of probably conversation, cross-disciplinary conversation, private, public, that needs to happen. And it's part of why it's so unique to have 30 different voices in one room that come from so many different backgrounds. I mean, I'm just kind of amazed at the breadth of, or the number and the breadth of issues that we've brought up here. I know that I promised to keep us on time. Do we have a couple more minutes? Are we? No? Okay. Well, we have 2 more minutes. So I'm going to I know Gustavo's been waiting. If you want to provide like 30 seconds, if everyone could just keep it very brief and sort of like big picture and tying things together, we can do a few more comments.
Okay, I had a whole.
I know a whole list, but
take
be brief
like 5
and,
minutes. But,
profound. Yes.
I guess one point about this point. I mean, the horticulture title and the sort of specialty crops are really key to solving some of the big food access problems. But one key point that no one has mentioned is part of the problem is the labor intensity of these crops. And so it touches immigration policy, it touches labor rights, and a lot of human rights issues. So we can't really I mean, there's a lot of trade-offs right now in the way that this paradigm that guided the food systems development in the 20th century has sort of given us a legacy of really thorny problems. So right now there's trade-offs between labor rights and access of the urban poor to healthy food. And so, I mean, what I wanted to talk about actually was the sort of alternative paradigms that are arising. And I teach a class in the U.S. food system to our master's students, who, by the way, Madi was one of.
Cool.
And I guess from the perspective of a political scientist who looks at these things, I do think that policy is really going to push which paradigm we end up adopting. And there is one that's based on the kinds of technologies that a lot of you are developing and that a lot of you have talked about, that's very compatible and in some ways perhaps dependent with the kind of scale of industrial agriculture that developed and the concentration of ownership that exists in various parts of the food chain. And that's probably also compatible with the industrial diet that creates a lot of the public health and social problems that led to the sort of unraveling of the paradigm. And the other one is a sort of more ecological model that really would require much more radical shifts in the way that agriculture and food production is structured. And from my perspective, it really is going to be the politics of food policy that drive that, and what kinds of political alliances we get, and if it's big food in Silicon Valley that drive this versus farmers and urban consumers and other kinds of activists. So
I'm glad you brought us back to politics and policy, because just to kind of bring this all back together, I think it would be probably wise for everyone who's super interested in these issues to continue the conversation with the agriculture committees Yeah, I know you just want more meetings and more folks coming in and briefing you on things, because I think if nothing else, we have learned just how even diving into one of these titles brings up so many issues, from labor to water and research and hemp, which is also super interesting and touches on so many other, everything from rural development and rural economies to manufacturing and water use. This stuff is really complicated, it's complex, it's important, and I think all of you in your comments today really showed that, and we covered a lot of ground in not very much time, so thank you so much. I believe there's going to be some documents available after this if you want to share with the group what those will be.
Thank you. So today's conversation, and thank you to everybody for joining it and the perspectives that you brought, the questions, the challenges. Today's conversation is part of the Concordia campaign for a sustainable global food supply. And this is the type of conversation that we're committed to having over the next several years, bringing together different perspectives to try and better understand partnership-based approaches that can fix at least some of the challenges that were addressed today. So in terms of next steps, there will be a report about today's summit that will go out in however long it takes us to write it. But we have a fairly quick turnaround on those. But then also continued engagement. We'll have webinars, we'll have small roundtables, my team is always available to speak about this further, and we're always looking to engage smart people and promote good ideas. So there is opportunity for follow-up. The very next one is in 10 minutes, and that is down. So when you exit this room, we're going to do a video launch. This has been a project that Concordia has been working on for the past year. Many of the folks around this table or in this room are actually represented in it. And what it is a narrative around some of the food challenges that the U.S. is facing today. And so we've made these these three-part mini-series that you can view upstairs on the lobby or on the ballroom level. At the Concordia booth, so small 3-minute, 4-minute snippets. But our partners at Legend have produced a beautiful 10-minute film that we're going to debut right now with opening remarks by Rodney Ferguson from Winrock International. And so that's going to take place. You'll walk out of here, and please continue down the hall to the right, past the elevators to this room that says Gallery on Lex. We will have some of Rodi's fantastic jerky, and it's an opportunity to not only watch this video, but to also continue the conversation that started right now. So it's not goodbye, but it's just down the hall.
What about Maddie's beer? Will we also have Maddie's beer?
Hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, we encourage you to visit Gallery on Lexington for the launch of Concordia's film on food sustainability in the United States, with special remarks by the distinguished Rodney Ferguson, President and CEO of Winrock International, happening at 1:30 p.m.